A beggar gave her last sandwich to an elderly woman who was hungry, not knowing she was the mother of a millionaire. Minutes later, the millionaire was stunned when he discovered what the beggar was capable of doing to his mother. Gianna woke up to the sound of metal gates being dragged against the rough concrete of the sidewalk. The awning of the department store that had protected her for 3 months was busy that Thursday morning, and 2 uniformed security guards were approaching with heavy and determined steps. She immediately recognized what was about to happen, as her 35 years of life, the last 2 on the streets, had already taught her all the signs of an imminent eviction. "Ma'am, you need to leave now. Store management's orders," said the taller security guard in a firm tone. Gianna's body protested when she tried to get up quickly from the damp cardboard that served as a mattress. Her back ached from the uncomfortable position of the night, and her knee joints seemed locked by the cold of the early morning. The shorter security guard was already collecting the cardboard and throwing it into a cleaning cart they had brought, while she was still trying to gather her belongings scattered around. "Please give me just 5 minutes to collect my things," she asked, trying to buy time. People passing by the commercial sidewalk began to stop and observe the scene with morbid interest. Some raised their cell phones to film, others whispered among themselves, and Gianna could feel the weight of dozens of stares upon her. A well-dressed lady passed by, covered her nose with her hand, and made a wide detour, as if poverty had a smell. "It's absurd they let these people stay here. It ruins the image of commerce," the woman commented loudly to her companion. Gianna tried to maintain her dignity while quickly collecting her few possessions. Her floral dress, donated by a church, was clean but worn from constant use, and her brown hair, which she tried to keep neat, was tied in an improvised bun. The old backpack where she kept her important documents was her most valuable possession, and she held it firmly against her chest. "You don't need to do this. I'll leave on my own," she said, trying to negotiate. The store manager appeared at the glass door, watching the operation with crossed arms and an expression of satisfaction. He made an impatient gesture to the security guards, indicating that they wanted the area cleaned immediately so as not to scare away customers. Gianna realized that arguing would be pointless and began putting her things in 2 plastic bags she had saved. "These people really have no shame, making a mess in front of stores," said a young man who was filming everything. As Gianna bent down to pick up a thin blanket, the taller security guard took her other things and began placing them further down the sidewalk. The abrupt movement caused the already worn strap of her backpack to break, and Gianna watched in horror as the zipper was also giving way. She ran to grab the backpack before the damage worsened, but the security guard had already placed it on the ground carelessly. "Be careful with my backpack. I have important documents in there," she warned, concerned. The group of onlookers had grown, forming a semicircle around the scene. Some teenagers laughed and made jokes about the situation, while a child pulled at his mother's sleeve asking why that lady lived on the street. The mother quickly pulled her son away, casting a look of disapproval at Gianna, as if she had chosen to be in that situation. "Don't look, son, let's get out of here," the mother said hastily. Gianna finished gathering her belongings and noticed that the sky was getting cloudy with dark clouds accumulating on the horizon. The weather forecast she had heard on the bakery radio announced a storm for late afternoon, and she would need to find safe shelter before that. With the damaged backpack in one hand and the bags in the other, she began to move away. "And don't come back or next time we'll call the authorities," warned the shorter security guard. Walking down the commercial street looking for another place to settle was always humiliating. In each store she passed, Gianna saw security guards and employees whispering and pointing in her direction, some already picking up the phone to alert neighboring establishments. The communication network among merchants worked efficiently to keep people like her moving. "You can't stop here, keep walking," said a security guard at the door of a pharmacy. After almost an hour of walking with the weight of her belongings, Gianna was exhausted and sweaty. Her clothes, despite being clean, clearly marked her condition as homeless, and people moved away when she passed. A group of ladies chatting at the door of a boutique interrupted their conversation to observe her with expressions of disapproval. "This is why commerce is failing, all this decay," one of them commented without bothering to lower her voice. Gianna found an alley between 2 commercial buildings that seemed like a possible location to temporarily take shelter. It was narrow, and had some cardboard boxes stacked that could serve as protection against the wind that was beginning to blow stronger. The smell of garbage was strong, but she had slept in worse places. "So it will have to do until I think of something better," she muttered to herself. Sitting on a wooden crate, Gianna decided to check the state of her backpack and the damage caused by the careless handling of the security guards. The zipper had completely given way on one side, leaving a considerable opening, and the inner lining was torn in several places. Her documents were all messed up, and some had gotten wet from the moisture of the cardboard where she slept. "How am I going to carry this now to the municipal shelter?" she wondered worriedly. The identity card was so worn out that it was barely possible to read her full name, and the photo was practically erased. The taxpayer registration was torn in the middle and being held by an old elastic band. Another document was broken in one corner, and the proof of residence from her last fixed address from 2 years ago was yellowed and brittle. "Without these documents in order, I won't get a spot at the shelter," she thought anxiously. The wind was getting stronger by the minute, and Gianna could feel the atmospheric pressure changing, a clear sign that the storm was approaching. She tried to improvise a repair on the backpack, tying the broken strap to create a kind of fastener for the zipper opening, but she knew it was a precarious solution. The first raindrops began to fall, thick and spaced. "I need to get out of here before the storm hits with full force," she decided, standing up. The municipal shelter was on the other side of town, at least 40 minutes walking distance, and Gianna knew she would need to hurry. She knew the strict rules of the place, where presenting documents was mandatory to get a spot, especially on stormy days when demand increased greatly. Without proper identification, she would be sent away mercilessly. "Maybe if I explain the situation, they'll make an exception," she thought with fragile hope. Gianna picked up her bags and the damaged backpack, holding everything firmly against her body to protect from the wind that was blowing increasingly stronger. Dry leaves, papers, and garbage swirled around the street in small whirlwinds, and people quickened their pace seeking shelter. A man in a suit ran past and bumped into her, almost knocking her bags down. "Get out of the way, can't you see it's going to rain?" he complained without even looking back. As she turned a corner, Gianna was hit by a particularly violent gust of wind that almost unbalanced her. The backpack, which she was trying to protect against her body, was ripped from her hands by the force of the wind and flew several meters before hitting a light post. The impact caused the tear in the zipper to open completely, and the documents began to fly out. "My documents, no!" she shouted, dropping her bags and running desperately. The papers danced in the air like dry leaves in autumn, rising and falling at the mercy of the tempestuous wind. Gianna ran from side to side, trying to catch them in the air, but they always escaped her hands at the last second. People passed by hurriedly and stepped on the documents without noticing, leaving shoe marks on the already fragile papers. "Please, someone help me catch these papers," she implored, but everyone was too busy seeking shelter. The identity card flew under a parked car, and Gianna had to kneel on the wet asphalt to try to reach it. When she finally did, the document was even more damaged, with a motor oil stain crossing the personal data. The health card was carried by the wind into the middle of the busy street and passed under several cars before stopping in a puddle of dirty water. "Everything is getting lost. How will I prove who I am?" she lamented, collecting the wet documents. Her street vendor, who was quickly arranging his stall before the rain, observed Gianna running after the papers and shook his head with disdain. A woman waiting for the bus at a nearby stop was filming the whole scene with her cell phone, probably to post on some social network later. Gianna felt the humiliation burn more than the cold wind on her face. "Not even the documents want to stay with me," she murmured bitterly. The taxpayer registration had gotten caught in a bush, and when Gianna went to get it, the paper tore in half. She held the two pieces trying to join them, but the wind snatched them from her hands again. One of the pieces flew high and disappeared over the roof of a building, impossible to recover. "Half of me went away with that paper," she thought, watching the document disappear. Gianna continued trying to recover what she could of her documents, but many had already flown too far away or were destroyed beyond usability. A group of students passed by her, laughing and commenting about filming for a viral video. One of them pretended to help, picking up a paper from the ground, but then crumpled it and threw it in a trash bin. "I did you a favor, trash in the trash," he said to his friends, who laughed loudly. The rain began to fall harder, quickly turning into a downpour. Gianna was still trying to collect the last recoverable documents when she saw her proof of residence being carried toward a drain. She ran as fast as her tired legs would allow, but arrived only in time to see the paper disappear through the sewer grate. "There goes my last known address," she said, kneeling beside the drain. Completely soaked, Gianna looked at the few wet and torn documents she had managed to save. Most were illegible or too damaged to serve as valid identification. Without them, she knew the municipal shelter wouldn't accept her, especially on a stormy night when spots were in high demand. "Now I'm officially nobody," she realized, her voice choked with frustration. A security guard from a nearby store approached with an umbrella, and for a moment, Gianna thought he was going to help. But he just pointed in the opposite direction and said she couldn't stand there blocking the entrance for customers. Even in the torrential rain, she would have to keep moving. "Move this misery out of here, you're scaring away the customers," he ordered without any compassion. Gianna collected the wet documents that remained and placed them in what was left of her destroyed backpack. The bags with her clothes were soaked and weighed twice as much as normal. She began to walk aimlessly in the rain, knowing that without documents she wouldn't find shelter anywhere. "At least the rain hides that I'm crying," she thought as water ran down her face. She tried to take shelter under a bank's awning, but a guard immediately appeared and said it wasn't allowed. At the bus stop, people crowded together to escape the rain, but when she approached, they all moved away as if she had some contagious disease. One lady even changed stops, preferring to get wet rather than stay near her. "I'm less than a stray animal," Gianna reflected sadly. The storm had transformed the streets into veritable rivers, and Gianna had difficulty walking with water hitting her ankles. Her old shoes, punctured in several places, were completely flooded, and she felt her feet numb with cold. Each step was torture, but she had no choice but to keep walking. "If I stop, I'll freeze," she said, shivering uncontrollably. Gianna passed by the illuminated entrance of a shopping mall and saw people coming and going with their purchases, protected by their colorful umbrellas. The contrast between their world and hers had never been so evident. A young couple passed by her laughing and talking, and the girl made a disgusted face when splashes of water from the puddle Gianna stepped in hit her designer pants. "How disgusting, watch where you're going," complained the indignant young woman. Exhausted, cold, and completely drenched, Gianna found an underpass that offered some protection from the rain. Other homeless people were already there, each in their own corner, keeping distance from one another. She sat on the cold concrete floor and examined her ruined documents again. "How did I get to this point?" she questioned herself, looking at the papers that once defined her identity. A middle-aged man who was also sheltering there looked at her and laughed scornfully. He said she was new to the streets, that she would soon learn that documents meant nothing when you're invisible to society. Gianna didn't respond, just hugged her destroyed backpack against her chest and closed her eyes. "Tomorrow I'll try again. Today I just need to survive," she murmured. The night would be long and cold in that underpass, without the possibility of going to the municipal shelter. Gianna could hear the rain falling heavily outside and the sound of cars passing over the puddle of water. Some rats ran around the corners, and the smell of mold and dirt was strong. "This is my five-star hotel now," she thought with bitter irony. Gianna tried to wring out her clothes to remove the excess water, but everything was so soaked that it didn't help much. She organized the few documents that remained, trying to see if she could piece them together to make them look less destroyed. Her ID card was in pieces, the registration form was half gone, and the health card was illegible. "Perhaps if I explain at the shelter tomorrow when the storm has passed," she hoped weakly. From the inside pocket of her dress, she took out a small amount of money she had managed to get by begging in the previous days. The notes were wet, but still usable, perhaps enough for a meal the next day. Gianna carefully put the money away, knowing that without the possibility of entering the shelter, every penny would be crucial. "I need to make this money last," she calculated mentally. A group of teenagers passed through the underpass making a racket, probably returning from some party. There were 5 young people, all well dressed in brand-name clothing. carrying bottles of expensive drinks and laughing loudly at their own jokes. When they saw the homeless people sheltered in the dark corners of the passage, one of them pointed and began making malicious comments about their smell and appearance. The others laughed and started taking photos with their expensive phones, making ironic poses as if they were in a zoo. "Look at this. Let's post it with the caption Urban Safari," one of them said between laughs. Gianna tried to make herself even smaller in her corner, turning her face to the wall to avoid appearing in the photos. But one of the teenagers noticed her and called the attention of the others, pointing to her wet clothes and the destroyed backpack beside her. He took an empty soda can he had been drinking from and threw it in her direction, barely missing her head and hitting the wall with a loud metallic noise. They all burst into laughter when Gianna instinctively cowered, protecting her face with her hands. "Look at the human trash hiding from the rain. How disgusting," one of them shouted before they continued on their way. Another teenager from the group stepped back and pretended he was going to throw the rest of his drink at Gianna, laughing when she cowered even more. He then spat on the ground near her and told his friends that these people should be removed from the city, that they ruined the urban landscape. A girl from the group took more photos while commenting that she would show her parents how dangerous it was to walk around there at night. "My father is right. The city hall should clean up this area," she said with disdain. The other homeless people in the passage just watched in silence, already accustomed to this type of humiliation. An elderly man who was in another corner shook his head sadly, mumbling something about how today's youth had completely lost compassion. A woman with a baby in her arms hugged the child tighter, as if she could protect it from the cruelty of the world just with her embrace. "Don't mind them, girl. People like that aren't worth our anger," she said quietly to Gianna. Gianna waited until she was sure that the teenagers had completely gone before relaxing her defensive posture. Her hands were trembling, not from cold, but from anger and humiliation. She looked at the crushed can on the ground near her, a metallic symbol of how invisible and disposable she had become in the eyes of society. Carefully, she picked up the can and placed it in a plastic bag that served as an improvised trash bin, because even in her situation, she maintained some sense of organization. "At least I still have the dignity not to throw trash on the ground," she muttered to herself. The underpass returned to its damp and oppressive silence, broken only by the distant sound of cars passing overhead and the constant dripping of water leaking through some crack in the ceiling. Gianna could hear the heavy breathing of other residents trying to sleep, some coughing because of the humidity, others mumbling in their disturbed dreams. Gianna observed the drops of water dripping from her clothes and forming a small puddle around her. Each drop that fell seemed to carry with it a piece of her former life, of her dignity, of her identity as a human being. She remembered when she was a university professor, respected by her students, invited to lectures, author of academic articles. Now she was just another shadow on the margins of society, invisible except when serving as cruel entertainment for bored teenagers. "How did I fall so low?" she questioned herself, looking at her dirty and calloused hands. The puddle around her grew slowly, reflecting the weak light that entered from the street. Gianna could see her distorted reflection in the dirty water, a face she barely recognized as her own. Eyes hollowed by hunger and sleepless nights, skin marked by the sun and constant exposure to the elements, hair that was once her pride now tangled and dull. Without documents to prove who she was, without the municipal shelter as an option, without hope of improving her situation in the short term, she wondered how much longer her body and mind would endure this life. "One day at a time, it's all I can do," she resigned herself as the storm raged outside. The sound of rain hitting hard on the asphalt above created a melancholic symphony that echoed through the passage. Gianna closed her eyes and tried to remember better times, when the sound of rain meant a cozy afternoon at home with a book and a cup of tea. Now it meant another night of wet clothes, piercing cold, and the certainty that the next day it would be even harder to find a dry place to rest. "The rain I once loved is now my enemy," she thought, pulling the damp blanket closer to her body. Gianna woke up with an aching body after spending the night in the cold, damp underpass. The storm had passed, but her clothes were still damp and heavy, sticking uncomfortably to her skin. She got up slowly, feeling every muscle protest, and tried to minimally fix her appearance before returning to the streets. The afternoon sun weakly entered through the passage entrance, indicating she had slept longer than intended. "I need to find something to eat soon. I'm feeling too weak," she muttered, trying to ignore the dizziness she felt as she stood up. The streets of the commercial center were busy that Friday afternoon, with people entering and leaving stores carrying colorful bags. Gianna walked slowly, still feeling the effects of a poor night's sleep and lack of proper food. She stopped in front of a bakery, attracted by the smell of fresh bread, and observed the movement through the window. Her stomach rumbled painfully, reminding her that she hadn't eaten anything substantial for almost 2 days. "Maybe if I ask politely, someone will give me some old bread," she thought as she approached the entrance. Before she could enter the bakery, Gianna heard shouts coming from a women's clothing store across the street. A middle-aged woman, apparently the owner of the establishment, was gesturing frantically while talking on the phone, pointing in different directions. 2 security guards from the nearby mall approached running, and Gianna realized something serious had happened. She decided to move away from there, as she had learned that commotion in commercial areas usually resulted in problems for people like her. "Better get out of here before I get blamed," she decided, beginning to move away. Gianna hadn't taken even 10 steps when she felt a heavy hand on her shoulder. One of the security guards had reached her and was holding her firmly, preventing her from continuing to walk. The store owner was right behind, her face red with anger, pointing an accusatory finger in her direction. Gianna tried to break free, but the guard maintained his firm grip while the woman approached, increasingly furious. "It's her, I'm sure it was her who stole my merchandise," shouted the shopkeeper, pointing at Gianna. The commotion quickly attracted a crowd of onlookers who formed a circle around them. Gianna tried to explain that she had just arrived there, that she hadn't even entered the store, but no one seemed interested in hearing her version. The shopkeeper categorically stated that she had seen her lurking around the store earlier, which was impossible, since Gianna had spent the entire morning in the underpass. "Ma'am, you're mistaken. I don't even know your store," Gianna protested desperately. The second security guard had already called the police, and Gianna felt panic growing in her chest. Without documents to prove her identity, without witnesses who could confirm where she was, her situation was extremely vulnerable. The shopkeeper continued shouting, saying she had lost several expensive items and was sure Gianna was responsible. Onlookers commented among themselves, some already filming everything with their phones. "This dirty homeless woman must have sold everything to buy drugs," someone in the crowd said. When the police car arrived, 2 officers got out and immediately were informed by the shopkeeper about the alleged theft. Gianna tried to explain her situation, but one of the officers interrupted her, saying she would have an opportunity to explain herself at the police station. They put her in the patrol car under the gaze of dozens of people, some applauding as if they were watching a spectacle of justice being served. "Please, you're making a mistake," begged Gianna as she was led to the car. The journey to the police station was short, but seemed to last an eternity for Gianna. She tried once more to explain to the officers that she was innocent, that she had nothing to do with the theft, but they seemed to have already decided on her guilt. One of them commented to the other that it was always the same story, that all criminals claimed to be innocent. Gianna felt tears of frustration burning her eyes, but refused to cry. "You'll see that you're arresting the wrong person," she stated, with what little dignity she still maintained. The police station was crowded that afternoon, with people waiting to file reports, others giving testimonies, and the constant noise of ringing phones. Gianna was taken directly to a room where the officer on duty was waiting for her. He was a man of about 50 years old, with a tired expression and apparently irritated at having to deal with yet another case. He looked Gianna up and down with evident contempt before beginning the interrogation. "Full name and documents," he ordered without even looking her in the eyes. Gianna explained about losing her documents in the storm the day before, trying to detail how the wind had carried everything down the drain. The officer rolled his eyes impatiently, clearly not believing her story. He said it was very convenient not to have documents just when she was accused of theft, that all criminals used this excuse. Gianna felt the injustice of the situation, weighing on her shoulders like a rock. "Officer, I can describe exactly where I was this morning. There's no way I could have been in the store," she tried to argue. The shopkeeper was called to give her testimony and repeated her accusations with even more vehemence. She claimed that Gianna had been seen lurking around the store several times during the week, which was a lie, since Gianna had only arrived in that area the day before after being expelled from the storefront. The woman described in detail the items that had been stolen, designer bags and expensive clothes, items that Gianna would never have the means or interest to steal. She must have passed them to a fence quickly, the shopkeeper speculated. Gianna was taken to a temporary cell while the officer analyzed the case. The cell was occupied by other women, some clearly drug users, others apparently professional criminals. When Gianna entered, they all looked at her with curiosity and some with hostility. A large and intimidating woman approached and asked what she was accused of. "Theft, but I'm innocent," Gianna replied, trying to keep her distance. The other women laughed when they heard her response, saying that everyone there was innocent, that nobody ever admitted guilt. A young woman who looked like an addict approached and began asking invasive questions about where Gianna hid her drugs, assuming she was a user. Gianna tried to explain that she didn't use anything, that she was just a homeless person, but this seemed to make her situation worse. "A beggar playing saint, those are the worst," commented one of the inmates. Gianna sat in a corner of the cell, trying to be as invisible as possible. She could feel the first signs of her blood sugar dropping, a slight trembling in her hands, and cold sweat on her forehead. She had borrowed insulin from another homeless person days ago, but without proper nutrition, her blood sugar was dangerously plummeting. She couldn't show weakness there, knew she would be seen as easy prey. "I need to stay strong, I can't faint here," she thought, breathing deeply. Time passed slowly in the cell, and Gianna observed the movement of the police station through the bars. Police officers came and went. Some people were released, others were booked and sent to detention. She desperately needed to make a call to try to get help, but she had no one to call. She then remembered the shelter where she occasionally got a bed. Perhaps they could confirm that she was known there. "God, I need to make a call, it's my right," she called, approaching the bars. After much insistence, an officer allowed Gianna to use the public phone in the hallway. She had only one coin that she had saved for emergencies, and her hands were shaking as she dialed the number of the shelter that she knew by heart. The phone rang several times before someone answered, and Gianna recognized the voice of the social worker who worked there. "Please, I'm Gianna. I need you to confirm that you know me," she said quickly. The social worker was silent for a moment before giving the terrible news that the shelter had been closed the week before due to lack of funds. All residents had been dismissed, and she had no idea where they had gone. Gianna felt the ground disappear beneath her feet with this information. Her last hope of getting someone to confirm her identity had vanished. "But you have records. You can confirm that I exist," she begged desperately. The call was cut off when the credit ran out, and Gianna was left holding the silent phone, unable to believe her bad luck. The officer ordered her back to the cell, and she obeyed mechanically, feeling completely defeated. Without witnesses, without documents, without anyone who could confirm who she was, her situation seemed hopeless. "I'm going to end up being convicted of something I didn't do," she thought in despair. Back in the cell, Gianna found the other inmates whispering about her. One of them had overheard her phone conversation and spread to the others that she had no one, that she was completely alone. This made her even more vulnerable, as experienced criminals knew that people without connections were easy targets in the system. "Poor thing, she's going to get screwed without anyone to pay her bail," one of them commented with fake compassion. Gianna felt a wave of nausea and dizziness, clear signs that her blood sugar was critically low. She leaned against the wall trying to disguise her illness, but the cold sweat on her forehead gave her away. One of the inmates noticed her condition and approached, not to help, but to see if she had something valuable hidden. Gianna had to gather all her strength to remain standing. "I'm fine, just tired," she lied, pushing the woman away. The chief finally called her back for interrogation after 3 long hours in the cell. Gianna could barely walk properly, but made a supreme effort to appear normal. The chief informed her that he had reviewed the security cameras in the area, but they didn't clearly show the moment of the theft. The shopkeeper had no concrete evidence beyond her suspicion based on prejudice. "We don't have sufficient evidence to keep you detained," he said reluctantly. Despite the decision to release her, the chief made a point of making it clear that Gianna was now registered in the system. Any future problems in the region, and she would be the first suspect. He said he had recorded her physical characteristics and that all merchants in the area would be alerted about her. Gianna heard the words as if they came from far away, her vision starting to blur. "Did you understand what I said? You are marked in this region," the chief repeated harshly. Gianna nodded weakly, wanting only to get out of there as quickly as possible. The chief released her with a final warning that he didn't want to see her again in his station. She picked up her wet and crumpled belongings that had been retained at the entrance and walked toward the exit. Each step was a monumental effort, and she could feel her legs trembling. "I just need to get outside, breathe fresh air," she thought, leaning against the wall. The police station stairs seemed to have multiplied, each step requiring superhuman effort to overcome. Gianna held firmly to the railing, but her sweaty hands slipped on the cold metal. She could hear voices and movement around her, but everything seemed distant and distorted. A police officer passed by her going up the stairs and made a comment about drunks not even being able to walk straight. "I'm not drunk, I'm sick," she tried to say, but the words didn't come out. Halfway down the stairs, Gianna felt her legs give way completely. She tried to hold onto the railing, but her hands no longer had strength. The world spun violently around her, and she felt her body tumble down the steps. The impact was cushioned by her bags, but her head hit the cold floor of the landing. "Help, someone help me," she whispered, but her voice was too weak to be heard. People passed by Gianna lying on the stairs, but most just walked around her assuming she was just another drunk or drug addict. A gentleman in a grey suit even stopped for a moment, taking off his glasses to better see the situation, but when he noticed her homeless appearance, her still damp and wrinkled clothes, he shook his head in disgust and continued on his way. A woman with a small child hurried past, covering her son's eyes with her hand while pulling him to the other side of the stairs. "Don't look, son. It's just a sick person who didn't take care of herself," said the mother, quickening her pace. A group of teenagers who had gone to the police station to recover an impounded bicycle came down the stairs laughing and talking loudly. When they saw Gianna lying there, one of them took out his phone to film, making jokes about how some people couldn't even handle an afternoon at the police station. Another lightly kicked one of her bags to see if she would react, and when Gianna moaned weakly, they laughed even louder. "Look, the homeless woman drank too much and can't even get up," one of them commented while recording. Gianna desperately tried to speak, to explain that she wasn't drunk, that she needed urgent medical help, but her mouth was too dry and the words came out as incomprehensible murmurs. A plainclothes officer passed by her going up the stairs and just looked with indifference, commenting to his colleague that it was impressive how these people managed to drink until they lost consciousness. No one noticed the clear signs of a medical emergency, the excessive cold sweat, the extreme pallor, the involuntary tremors. "Help, hospital," Gianna managed to whisper, but her voice was lost in the noise of the police station's activity. An elderly lady with a cane slowly descended the stairs and had to carefully dodge Gianna. She paused for a moment, seeming to consider helping, but then saw the dirty, torn clothes, the destroyed backpack, and decided it wasn't her problem. The lady even commented aloud to a passing cleaning staff member that it was absurd to let these people lie around at the entrance of the police station. "This place is turning into a den of drug addicts," she complained indignantly. The janitor, a middle-aged black man who had worked there for years, approached Gianna not to help but to see if she was making the floor too dirty. He noticed she had left dirty watermarks from her wet shoes and sighed in irritation, knowing he would have to clean it later. He even poked Gianna with the handle of his broom to see if she would move and leave on her own. "Hey, you can't sleep here, go to the street," he said without caring about the response. Gianna felt her body growing heavier, as if she was sinking into the cold concrete floor. She could hear the voices around her, but they seemed to come from far away, distorted as if she were underwater. She tried to raise her hand to ask for help, but the movement was so weak that no one noticed. Her breathing was becoming more shallow, and she struggled to keep her eyes open. "I can't die here, not like this," she thought, with what little consciousness she still maintained. Gianna gradually regained consciousness, first noticing the characteristic smell of disinfectant mixed with medicines, then hearing the constant murmur of voices and medical equipment. She tried to open her eyes, but her eyelids seemed to weigh tons, and the fluorescent ceiling light made her close them again with a groan of discomfort. Her entire body ached, especially her head where she had hit the police station stairs, and she could feel an improvised bandage on her forehead. Someone had finally realized she needed medical help and brought her to the community hospital, though she had no idea who or how. "Where am I? What happened to me?" she mumbled, trying to orient herself. When she finally managed to keep her eyes open, Gianna realized she was lying on an old uncomfortable stretcher in the hospital corridor. Around her, dozens of other people on similar stretchers waited for care, some moaning in pain, others sleeping, and some talking quietly with companions. The corridor was overcrowded, with stretchers pushed against the walls, barely leaving space for staff to pass through. A lady next to her coughed incessantly, and a man on the other side held a cloth to his injured arm. "At least I'm alive, that's what matters," she thought, trying to be grateful. Gianna tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness made her lie down again. She noticed there was an IV connected to her arm, probably glucose to treat her blood sugar crisis. The IV bag was almost empty, dripping the last drops of transparent liquid. She looked around for a health professional to ask about her situation, but everyone seemed too busy running from one side to another. "Excuse me, can someone tell me how long I've been here? How did I get here?" she called weakly. A heavy-set nurse with a tired and irritated expression finally approached Gianna's stretcher. She quickly checked the empty IV, disconnected the access without any gentleness, making Gianna moan in pain, and then crossed her arms, looking at her with evident impatience. The woman had deep circles under her eyes and a wrinkled uniform, clearly at the end of a long and exhausting shift. Her badge was crooked, and she didn't even bother to straighten it as she spoke. "You were brought in by a police officer, said you couldn't stay at the station anymore and left you here, wanting no problems at his station. But you're fine now, the IV is finished. Now you need to make room for those who really need it. We don't want problems with homeless people either," the nurse said harshly. Gianna tried to explain that she still felt weak, that she had nowhere to go, that she had lost her documents and needed more time to recover. But the nurse interrupted her with an abrupt gesture of her hand, saying that the hospital wasn't a hotel and that there were people in much more serious condition waiting for a stretcher. She pointed to the entrance of the corridor where more patients arrived every minute, some being carried, others leaning on relatives. "This isn't a rest home for beggars. Get up and leave," ordered the nurse without any compassion. With difficulty, Gianna got up from the stretcher, her legs still wobbly from weakness. She had to lean against the wall to avoid falling, and the nurse rolled her eyes impatiently, muttering something about people who pretended to be worse than they really were. Gianna looked for her belongings and found her wet bags thrown under the stretcher, even more crushed and dirty than before. The destroyed backpack was precariously tied with a piece of string that someone had used to try to close the tear. "Thanks for taking care of my things," she said sarcastically. While gathering her belongings, Gianna felt in her dress pocket a small package that wasn't there before. It was a sandwich wrapped in a paper napkin, still warm, probably left by some charitable soul who had noticed her situation. The smell of bread with butter and cheese made her stomach growl violently, reminding her that she hadn't eaten anything substantial in days. Her hands trembled with hunger as she held the sandwich, and she had to fight the urge to devour it right there. "I need to save this for a real emergency," she decided, carefully putting it back in her pocket. Gianna began walking through the crowded hospital corridor, avoiding stretchers, wheelchairs, and people waiting for care. The floor was dirty with marks from wet shoes and some suspicious stains she preferred not to identify. The walls, which were once white, now had a yellowish tone of accumulated dirt, with outdated and torn health campaign posters. The air was heavy and stuffy, with the ventilation system clearly inadequate for the number of people crowded there. "How can people heal in a place like this?" she wondered, observing the precarious conditions. Passing by an improvised waiting area with broken plastic chairs, Gianna noticed an elderly lady sitting alone in a corner. The woman was well dressed, with a fine fabric skirt and blouse set, genuine leather shoes and a designer handbag, clearly out of place in that environment of poverty and abandonment. Her white hair was disheveled, something unusual for someone of her apparent social class, and she trembled slightly while looking around with a confused and frightened expression. "Where am I? What place is this?" the lady muttered repeatedly. Gianna approached slowly, noticing that the elderly lady seemed completely disoriented. Donna Claire, as Gianna would later discover was her name, held her purse against her chest as if it were her only anchor to reality. Her light blue eyes were glazed and moist, and she rocked back and forth in a chair that creaked with each movement. When Gianna got closer, she could hear the lady murmuring about being hungry, about not knowing where she was, about wanting to go home. "Excuse me, ma'am. Can I help you with anything?" Gianna asked gently. Claire looked at Gianna with a mixture of hope and fear, like a lost child looking for help. She grabbed Gianna's arm with surprising strength for her age, and her thin fingers trembled against the wet fabric of the dress. The elderly woman began speaking incoherently about having gone out to buy bread, about not finding her way back, about her son who must be worried. Gianna immediately realized that the lady was suffering from some kind of mental confusion, possibly dementia or Alzheimer's. "I'm so hungry, my dear. Do you have something to eat?" Claire begged with tears in her eyes. Gianna's heart tightened upon hearing the request. She could feel her own stomach twisting with hunger, the weakness still present in her body from the low blood sugar crisis she had suffered. The sandwich in her pocket seemed to weigh a ton, representing her only guarantee of food for who knows how many days. But looking at that elderly lady, clearly vulnerable and lost, trembling with hunger and fear, Gianna knew she couldn't just walk away. "Are you alone here? Where is your family?" she asked, trying to buy time. Claire shook her head in confusion, saying she didn't know, that she couldn't remember how she had gotten there. She squeezed Gianna's arm more tightly and repeated that she was very hungry, that she hadn't eaten since morning, or was it yesterday, she wasn't sure. The elderly woman began to cry softly, silent tears running down her wrinkled cheeks, and Gianna felt her heart breaking. She looked around, hoping to see some relative searching for the lady, some hospital staff who could help, but everyone was too busy with their own problems. "Please, anything, a cookie, a piece of bread," Claire pleaded. Gianna took a deep breath and made a decision that she knew could cost her dearly. She took the sandwich from her pocket, the precious food that could be the difference between being able to stay on her feet or fainting again. Her hands trembled as she unwrapped the napkin, revealing the simple bread that in that moment seemed like a feast. The smell of food made her stomach protest even more violently, but she ignored her own need. "Here, ma'am, eat slowly," she said, offering the sandwich to Claire. Claire's eyes lit up like a child's on Christmas morning when she saw the sandwich. She took it with both trembling hands, as if it were something too precious to be real. The first bite was hesitant, then more confident, and Gianna could see relief spreading across the elderly woman's face as she ate. Claire chewed slowly, savoring each piece, and occasionally looked at Gianna with gratitude overflowing in her eyes. "You are an angel, my child. An angel that God sent," she said between bites. Gianna sat beside Claire as she ate, trying to ignore her own hunger that now seemed to scream in protest. She could feel saliva accumulating in her mouth as she watched the elderly woman eat, and had to swallow several times to control the urge to ask for a piece. Her vision became slightly blurry for a moment, a warning that her body was not yet completely recovered from the previous crisis. But she remained firm, smiling encouragingly at Claire. "Eat it all, ma'am. It will do you good," she encouraged. While Claire ate, Gianna noticed an identification bracelet on her wrist, but it was wet and the ink had smudged, making it impossible to read the information. Gianna looked around for a staff member who might provide information about Claire's situation, but everyone seemed too overwhelmed to be approached. "Do you remember how you got here to the hospital?" she asked, trying to obtain more information. Claire stopped eating for a moment, her face contracting in concentration as she tried to remember. She mumbled something about flashing lights, sirens, people in white, but nothing coherent enough to form a complete narrative. Gianna realized that the lady's mental confusion was severe, and she would need specialized medical help, not just food. But at least now, with something in her stomach, Claire seemed calmer and less agitated. "Don't worry about remembering now, the important thing is to eat," Gianna reassured her. As Claire finished the sandwich, Gianna could feel her own energy rapidly draining away. The combination of days without proper nourishment, the recent low blood sugar crisis, and now having given away her only meal was taking its toll. Her hands began to tremble again, and she had to lean on the chair to avoid swaying. The hospital corridor seemed to spin slightly, and she blinked several times, trying to clear her vision. "I need to hold on a little longer. She needs me," she thought determinedly. Claire finished the last piece of the sandwich and held Gianna's hand with gratitude. The elderly woman seemed more lucid now, her eyes more focused, and she began to speak more coherently about her son, an important businessman who must be looking for her. Gianna smiled weakly, happy to have helped, but aware that her own body was reaching its limit. She tried to stand up to seek help for Claire, but her legs trembled and she had to sit down again. "Ma'am, I'll try to find someone to help," she said in a weak voice. Gianna made a second attempt to stand up, this time leaning more firmly on the chair. She managed to get to her feet, but had to hold onto the wall when a wave of nausea hit her. Her empty stomach protested violently, and she could feel cold sweat beginning to form on her forehead. Claire noticed Gianna's discomfort and held her hand with concern. "My child, you're not well. Sit here with me," said Claire, gently pulling her. Gianna sat down again, unable to resist Claire's gentle insistence. The elderly woman began to caress her hand, a maternal gesture that brought tears to Gianna's eyes. It had been so long since anyone had shown genuine concern for her. Claire took a cloth handkerchief from her purse and gently wiped the sweat from Gianna's face. "You gave me your food, didn't you? I saw how you looked while I was eating," Claire said with sudden lucidity. Gianna tried to deny it, but she didn't have the strength to lie convincingly. Claire embraced Gianna with her fragile arms, and Gianna couldn't hold back her tears. It was strange to be consoled by someone she was trying to help, but the human warmth was something she hadn't felt in so long. Claire began to hum softly an old melody, gently rocking as if she were lulling a child to sleep. "Rest a little, dear. You need it," Claire murmured. But Gianna's body was no longer obeying commands. She could feel her muscles becoming increasingly weaker, as if they were dissolving. The vision was getting blurry, with black dots dancing in the periphery. She tried to speak, to warn Claire that something was very wrong, but her mouth was too dry and the words wouldn't come out. The trembling that had started in her hands had spread throughout her body. "Ms. Claire, I need help," she managed to whisper. Claire immediately realized something was terribly wrong. Gianna was as pale as paper, sweat running down her face despite the uncontrollable shaking. The elderly woman tried to get the attention of people passing by, but no one stopped. A doctor rushed past and Claire tried to grab him by the coat, but he pulled away, saying he had an emergency. Claire held Gianna tighter, feeling the young woman's body becoming increasingly limp. "Someone please, this girl needs help," Claire shouted desperately. Gianna tried to stay conscious, but it was like fighting against an impossible current. She could feel her heart beating irregularly, sometimes accelerating as if it would explode, sometimes almost stopping. Her breathing was becoming increasingly shallow, and no matter how hard she tried, air didn't seem to reach her lungs. Her hands were numb, and the numbness was climbing up her arms. "I can't faint here. Claire needs me," she thought, fighting. A cleaning staff member passed by, pushing a cart, and Claire practically threw herself in front of him. She begged him to call for help, explaining that Gianna had given her only food to her and was now dying. The man looked at Gianna and saw that the situation was serious. He dropped the cart and ran to call for help, shouting for a nurse. Claire returned to Gianna, holding her head that was drooping to the side. "Hang in there, my little angel, help is coming," Claire cried. Gianna felt as if she were floating, disconnected from her own body. She could hear Claire talking, but the words seemed to come from far away, distorted and meaningless. The hospital corridor was spinning, the fluorescent lights creating trails in her vision. She tried to focus on Claire, to use the elderly woman's face as an anchor to stay present, but even that was becoming difficult. "I'm sorry, Miss Claire. I tried," she murmured. A nurse finally came running, followed by a young doctor. They immediately realized the gravity of the situation. Gianna was in severe hypoglycemic shock, complicated by extreme malnutrition. The doctor shouted orders to bring a stretcher and equipment. Claire had to be gently pulled away while they worked, but she refused to completely let go of Gianna's hand. "She saved my life, doctor. She gave me everything she had," Claire sobbed. Gianna was urgently placed on the stretcher. An oxygen mask was put on her face, and a nurse struggled to find a vein for intravenous access. Gianna's veins had collapsed from dehydration and malnutrition, making the procedure extremely difficult. The doctor ordered concentrated glucose to be prepared immediately. Gianna could feel hands working on her body, but it was as if she were observing from outside. "I'm dying," she thought, with strange calmness. Claire followed the stretcher. As they rushed down the corridor toward the emergency room, she shouted to anyone who would listen that Gianna was an angel, that she had sacrificed everything for a stranger. Some people stopped to observe the commotion. Others filmed with their cell phones. A social worker tried to take Claire away, but the elderly woman clung to the emergency room door. "I'm not leaving here until I know she's okay," Claire declared with determination. Gianna was taken into the emergency room, the doors closing behind her with a definitive sound. She could hear urgent voices around her, equipment being turned on, alarms sounding. Someone finally managed to place an IV, and she felt the cold liquid entering her veins. But her body was so exhausted that even that seemed not to be enough. "She's going into multiple organ failure," she heard someone say. Outside, Claire had knelt on the floor, praying aloud for Gianna's life. People passed by, looking curiously at the well-dressed lady kneeling on the dirty hospital floor. The social worker tried again to convince her to sit down, but Claire was unyielding. She promised God anything in exchange for Gianna's life. "She's too good to die, Lord. Take me instead," Claire begged. Inside the emergency room, the medical team fought to stabilize Gianna. Her body had been pushed to the absolute extreme, and now multiple systems were failing simultaneously. The cardiac monitor showed dangerous arrhythmias. Her blood pressure was critically low, and glucose levels were still dangerously low despite the infusion. "We're going to lose her if we can't stabilize her soon," said the doctor urgently. Gianna was floating between consciousness and unconsciousness, sometimes managing to hear fragments of what was happening around her, other times plunging into total darkness. In a moment of lucidity, she thought about Claire outside, waiting for news. At least she had managed to help someone before the end. It was worth it, she thought as she felt the darkness pulling her again. The doctor ordered more medications, increased the glucose infusion rate, and requested urgent tests. The nurse reported that vital signs were dangerously fluctuating. Another doctor was called for consultation. They discussed treatment options while working frantically. Gianna was young. Her body should be able to recover, but the state of extreme malnutrition complicated everything. "She gave her last meal to someone else," informed the nurse who had heard Claire. The medical team momentarily fell silent upon hearing this. In a community hospital where they saw the worst of humanity daily, acts of such altruism were rare. This seemed to renew their determination to save Gianna. The lead doctor ordered all available equipment to be brought in. "This woman is not going to die on my watch," he declared firmly. Gianna felt the cold spreading through her body, starting from her extremities and moving toward the center. It was different from the cold of sleeping on the street. It was a cold that came from within, as if her cells were giving up one by one. She tried to cling to life, to think of reasons to keep fighting, but her mind was becoming increasingly foggy. "Claire," she murmured, the only word she could form. Outside, Claire had convinced a nurse to give her information. When she learned that Gianna was fighting for her life, she cried even harder. The social worker had managed to contact Claire's son, who was on his way, but Claire refused to leave without knowing Gianna's fate. She told everyone who passed by about the young woman's sacrifice. "She had nothing and gave me everything," Claire repeated. The hours passed slowly. Inside the emergency room, the battle continued. Gianna had been intubated. Machines were breathing for her while her body fought to recover. Medications were constantly adjusted, tests were conducted, specialists were consulted. Each small improvement was celebrated, each deterioration aggressively combated. "Glucose levels are slowly rising," announced a nurse hopefully. Gianna was lost in a place between life and death, floating in a void without pain, but also without sensation. Occasionally, she felt a pull back to her body, a wave of pain or discomfort that reminded her she was still alive. She could hear distant voices, sometimes recognizing words, but mostly it was just noise. "I'm still here," she thought, surprised. Claire had fallen asleep in the waiting room, exhausted by emotion and effort. Her son Sebastian had arrived and was by her side, having heard the whole story of what had happened. He was impressed and moved by the sacrifice of a complete stranger for his mother. He had asked the doctors about Gianna's condition and offered to pay for any necessary treatment. "Do whatever it takes to save her," he had said. Finally, after hours of struggle, Gianna's vital signs began to stabilize. Glucose was at safer levels, her heart had returned to a more regular rhythm, and she was beginning to breathe on her own. The lead doctor went out to give the news, finding Claire and Sebastian waiting anxiously. "She's stable for now, but still critical," he informed them cautiously. Claire cried with relief, hugging her son. Sebastian thanked the doctor and insisted that Gianna receive the best possible treatment. He explained that Gianna had saved his mother, not only from hunger, but possibly from something worse, as Claire could have wandered anywhere in her confused state. "This woman is a hero," Sebastian said emotionally. Gianna remained unconscious but stable, her body slowly beginning the long process of recovery. The doctors transferred her to the intensive care unit, where she would be constantly monitored. Claire insisted on visiting her as soon as it was allowed, sitting beside her bed and holding her hand. "Come back, my little angel. The world needs people like you," Claire whispered to the unconscious Gianna. Sebastian Clark drove his imported car through the deserted streets of Dawn, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white. He had received the call from the hospital less than 30 minutes ago, informing him that his mother had been located after nearly 24 hours missing. The 45-year-old businessman, always so controlled and rational in his business decisions, felt panic growing in his chest with each traffic light that delayed him. His mother, Claire, had left home the previous morning and simply disappeared, leaving the entire family in despair. "Please, let her be okay, please," he muttered, accelerating through the empty streets. The community hospital appeared ahead, a grey, weathered building that Sebastian had never needed to visit in his privileged life. He parked his car haphazardly at the emergency entrance, not even caring if it was in a prohibited area, and ran inside. The reception was relatively empty at that hour of the early morning, just a few patients waiting for care, and tired staff circulating through the corridors. Sebastian headed to the main counter, his impeccable appearance completely at odds with his surroundings. "My mother, Claire Clark, they called saying she's here," he said almost breathlessly. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a bored expression, slowly typed the name into the antiquated computer. Sebastian drummed his fingers on the counter impatiently, each second seeming like an eternity. Finally, the woman found the record and indicated the way to the VIP room where Claire was being cared for. Sebastian practically ran through the corridors, his Italian shoes echoing on the worn floor, following the signs precariously fixed to the peeling walls. "VIP room, third corridor on the right," he repeated mentally. Upon entering the room, Sebastian saw his mother sitting in an armchair, being attended by two nurses who were checking her vital signs. Claire looked fragile and disoriented, but physically well, which brought immense relief to Sebastian. He rushed to her and hugged her carefully, smelling the familiar perfume that immediately transported him to his childhood. Claire looked at him with confusion for a moment, then her face lit up with recognition. "Sebastian, my son, you came to get me," she said with a weak but happy voice. The nurses began to explain the situation to Sebastian, telling how Claire had been found wandering confused through the hospital, unable to explain how she had gotten there. One of them, younger and apparently more sensitive to the situation, began to relate something extraordinary that had happened. She told about a homeless woman who had given her last food to Claire when she found her hungry and disoriented in the hospital corridor. "The lady had nothing, Mr. Clark, and yet she gave her only sandwich to your mother," explained the nurse, visibly moved. Sebastian felt a mixture of gratitude and disbelief upon hearing the story. In his world of ruthless business and calculated relationships, acts of such altruism were practically non-existent. He looked at his mother, who now seemed more lucid, and she confirmed the story with tears in her eyes. Claire held her son's hands and began to talk about the little angel who had saved her, how she had given everything even though she had nothing. "She was feeling sick, Sebastian, and still took care of me," Claire cried. The older nurse interrupted to provide more shocking details about the situation. She explained that the woman, identified only as Gianna, had collapsed shortly after helping Claire and was now in the public intensive care unit in critical condition. The young woman was in severe diabetic coma. Her body had gone into multiple organ failure after days of extreme deprivation. "She literally sacrificed her life for your mother, sir," said the nurse seriously. Sebastian felt as if he had been struck by lightning. Guilt and gratitude fought within him as he processed the information. A complete stranger had risked everything to help his mother, while he, with all his resources, hadn't even managed to prevent her from leaving home unaccompanied. He stood up abruptly, determination replacing the initial shock on his face. "Where is she? I need to see her immediately," he demanded with the natural authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The nurses exchanged uncomfortable glances before explaining that the public intensive care unit had strict visiting hours and that it would not be possible to see her at that moment. Sebastian did not accept the answer and demanded to speak with the physician in charge immediately. His voice carried the weight of years commanding companies and negotiating million-dollar contracts. The younger nurse hurried out to call the doctor on duty. "I'll fix this, Mum. This woman will receive the best possible treatment," Sebastian promised. While waiting, Sebastian called his personal assistant, even though it was 3 in the morning. He ordered an immediate search for the best diabetes and intensive care specialists in the city to prepare whatever was necessary for an urgent medical transfer. Claire watched her son take control of the situation, as he always did, but this time with an emotional urgency she rarely saw in him. "She saved my life, son. Don't let her die," Claire begged, squeezing his hand. The on-duty doctor finally arrived, a tired middle-aged man who clearly wasn't happy about being disturbed. Sebastian immediately began questioning him about Gianna's condition, demanding complete reports and explanations about the treatment being given. The doctor, initially irritated by the authoritative tone, explained that Gianna was in critical but stable condition, receiving the standard treatment for her condition. "She is receiving adequate care within the limitations of the community hospital," the doctor said defensively. Sebastian wasn't satisfied with the response and declared that he wanted Gianna transferred immediately to the best private hospital in the city, with all costs covered by him. The doctor shook his head, explaining that it wasn't that simple, that there were protocols to follow, paperwork to fill out, and that Gianna's critical state made any transfer risky. Sebastian felt frustration growing in the face of bureaucracy that could cost the life of the woman who saved his mother. "Doctor, this woman saved the most important person in my life. Make it happen," he ordered. The doctor sighed and began explaining the procedures necessary for a hospital transfer. It would require authorization from hospital management, a specialized ambulance for transporting critical patients, acceptance from the receiving hospital, and a series of documents that normally took days to process. Sebastian took out his cell phone and began making calls, using his influence and contacts to speed up the process. "Yes, I need to speak with the director of St. Luke's Hospital now," he said during one of the calls. While Sebastian worked frantically on his phone, Claire insisted on being taken to see Gianna. The nurses tried to dissuade her, but she was determined. With the nurses' help, Claire was wheeled in a wheelchair to the public intensive care unit. The contrast between the VIP room where she had been and the overcrowded ICU was shocking. "My God, she's in this horrible place because of me," Claire cried upon seeing the conditions. Gianna was in one of the many cramped beds in the ICU, connected to various machines monitoring her vital signs. Her face was as pale as paper, her lips with a slightly bluish coloration, and her body motionless except for the breathing assisted by machines. Claire approached as close as the nurses allowed and began talking to Gianna, even knowing she couldn't hear her. "Come back, my little angel. You need to come back. There's so much good waiting for you," Claire whispered. Sebastian arrived shortly after, having managed to speak with several influential contacts in record time. He stopped when he saw Gianna for the first time, the reality of the situation hitting him with full force. This young woman, who had clearly gone through terrible hardships, was fighting for her life because she had chosen to save his mother instead of herself. He approached the bed and observed the monitors showing unstable vital signs. "How long has she been in these conditions?" he asked the doctor who had followed him. The doctor checked the clipboard with Gianna's medical record, and his expression became even more serious. He explained that Gianna had been in critical condition for hours, that her body was fighting but reaching its limit. Without adequate resources and specialized treatment, the chances were diminishing by the hour. The diabetes had caused severe damage, and the extreme malnutrition complicated any attempt at stabilization. "Being honest, Mr. Clark, under the current conditions, she has only a few hours," the doctor reluctantly admitted. Sebastian felt time running out like sand between his fingers. He took his cell phone again and called directly to the owner of the best private hospital in the city, an old business partner. After an intense conversation, he managed to secure an immediate place in the private ICU and a specialized ambulance that would arrive in 30 minutes. He then turned to the community hospital doctor with iron determination. "Prepare all necessary documentation now. She will be transferred as soon as the ambulance arrives," he declared. The doctor tried to protest, mentioning legal issues and responsibilities, but Sebastian interrupted him. He called his personal lawyer, even though it was the middle of the night, and put him on speakerphone to talk with the doctor. The lawyer explained that Sebastian would assume full legal responsibility for the transfer and was already preparing the necessary documents. The bureaucracy that would normally take days was being demolished by Sebastian's power and influence. "I will not let this woman die because of paperwork," he stated categorically. While waiting for the ambulance, Sebastian stayed by Gianna's bedside along with his mother. Claire held Gianna's inert hand, telling stories about her life, about her grandchildren, about anything that might somehow reach the young woman's consciousness. Sebastian obsessively watched the monitors, noticing every small variation in vital signs. An alarm sounded when Gianna's blood pressure dropped dangerously, and the medical team rushed to stabilize her. "She's getting worse. Where is the damn ambulance?" Sebastian shouted in frustration. The medical team worked quickly to stabilize Gianna, adjusting medications and checking equipment. The doctor explained that Gianna's body was at its limit, that multiple organs were under extreme stress. Sebastian watched helplessly as the professionals fought to keep Gianna alive. His mother prayed softly beside him, her trembling hands clutching her rosary. "Please, not now. Hold on a little longer," Sebastian silently begged. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was only 40 minutes, the specialized ambulance arrived. The highly trained paramedic team entered the ICU with state-of-the-art equipment. They immediately began preparing Gianna for transport, checking every detail to ensure she would survive the journey. Sebastian watched everything attentively, making sure nothing would be neglected. "Be careful with her, please. This woman is important," he told the paramedics. The transfer was a delicate and tense process. Gianna had to be temporarily disconnected from some equipment to be moved to the transport stretcher, and every second without full support was critical. Doctors from both hospitals coordinated by phone, ensuring everything would be ready to receive her on the other side. Claire insisted on accompanying Gianna in the ambulance, but Sebastian convinced her to go with him in his car. "We'll be right behind her, Mom, I promise," he assured her. During the journey to the private hospital, Sebastian drove right behind the ambulance, the emergency lights illuminating the dark early morning. Claire never took her eyes off the vehicle ahead, as if her vigilance could somehow protect Gianna. The 20-minute journey seemed endless, each traffic light an eternity, each turn a potential threat. "She'll make it, son, she's strong," Claire said, more to convince herself than to comfort Sebastian. Upon arriving at the private hospital, the difference was immediately visible. A complete medical team was waiting at the entrance, with cutting-edge equipment ready. Gianna was quickly transferred to the private ICU, an individual suite with the most modern monitoring and support devices. Sebastian observed as the new medical team took over her care, noting the superior professionalism and resources. "Do all necessary tests, use every available technology," he instructed the head physician. The new doctor in charge, a renowned specialist in intensive care, immediately began a complete evaluation of Gianna. He ordered a battery of tests that weren't available at the community hospital, including state-of-the-art CT scans and MRIs. Sebastian and Claire were led to a private waiting room where they could await the results in more comfort. "Now we wait and pray, Mom," Sebastian said, embracing Claire. While they waited, Sebastian took the opportunity to obtain more information about Gianna. He asked his security team to investigate who this woman was, her history, how she had ended up on the streets. The information that came back was fragmented, but painted a tragic picture of a life destroyed by circumstances beyond control. A university professor who had lost everything, including a daughter. "My God, she has suffered so much and yet she helped my mother," Sebastian reflected emotionally. After 2 hours of intensive examinations, the head physician returned with a grave expression. He sat before Sebastian and Claire and began to explain the results. Gianna was indeed in critical condition due to uncontrolled diabetes and severe malnutrition, but the tests had revealed something even more concerning. She had a rare cardiac condition that had been aggravated by the extreme stress on her body. "Mr. Clark, in addition to everything we already knew, Gianna has a congenital heart malformation," the doctor revealed. Sebastian felt his blood freeze in his veins upon hearing the news. The doctor continued explaining that the condition, normally manageable with proper treatment, had become critical due to Gianna's weakened state. Her heart was working far beyond its capacity, trying to compensate for all the other failures in her system. Without immediate corrective surgery, Gianna's heart would completely give out. "How much time does she have?" Sebastian asked with a tense voice. The doctor was direct in his response, explaining that Gianna had at most 6 hours before the damage to her heart became irreversible. The necessary surgery was extremely complex and expensive, requiring a specialized team and equipment that not all hospitals possessed. Fortunately, this hospital had the necessary resources, but the risk was extremely high given Gianna's debilitated state. "The chance of survival from surgery in her current state is less than 40%, the doctor admitted. Claire began to cry uncontrollably upon hearing the prognosis. She clung to Sebastian, begging him to do something, anything to save Gianna. Sebastian embraced his mother, his own composure finally beginning to crack. He had built an empire, commanded hundreds of employees, closed million-dollar deals, but now felt completely powerless as life drained from this woman. "Do the surgery, doctor, immediately," he ordered with a choked voice. The doctor nodded and began to explain the necessary procedures. They would need to assemble the specialized surgical team, prepare the cardiac surgery room, secure blood for possible transfusions, and stabilize Gianna as much as possible before the procedure. All of this would take at least 2 hours, precious time that Gianna barely had. Sebastian authorized everything without hesitation, signing the necessary documents without even reading them. "Money is not an issue, save her," he declared. While the medical team mobilized for the emergency surgery, Sebastian and Claire were authorized to see Gianna for a few minutes. She remained unconscious, but seemed even more fragile than before, if that were possible. The monitors showed the battle her heart was waging, with frequent arrhythmias and unstable blood pressure. Claire approached and gently kissed Gianna's forehead. "You will live, my dear, you need to live," she whispered. Sebastian watched his mother with Gianna and felt an iron determination take over him. This woman had given everything for a stranger, had shown a kindness he rarely saw in his corporate world. He took out his cell phone and began making more calls, mobilizing resources he didn't even know he had. He called the best cardiac surgeons in the country, offering any amount for them to come immediately. "Yes, I need him here in 2 hours, I don't care how," he said during one of the calls. One of the country's best cardiac surgeons agreed to come by helicopter from a neighboring city. Sebastian also arranged for specialized equipment to be brought from another hospital, creating the best possible conditions for the surgery. He was determined to give Gianna every possible chance of survival. Claire watched her son work tirelessly and felt pride mixed with sadness. "She brought out the best in you, son," she commented. Time was running against them as they prepared everything for the surgery. Gianna had 2 crises during preparation, her heart nearly stopping on both occasions. The medical team managed to stabilize her, but it was clear they couldn't wait much longer. The specialist surgeon finally arrived, and after reviewing the tests, confirmed the severity of the situation. "It's one of the most complex surgeries I've seen under these conditions," he admitted to Sebastian. Sebastian asked to speak with Gianna before she was taken to surgery, even knowing she couldn't hear him. He approached the bed and held her cold, lifeless hand. For a moment, the tough businessman disappeared, replaced by a man deeply touched by a stranger's sacrifice. He promised Gianna that if she survived, she would never want for anything again, that he would care for her like family. "You saved my mother. Now let me save you," he whispered. Claire also said goodbye to Gianna before the surgery, placing in her hand a small rosary she always carried. She kissed Gianna again on the forehead and whispered a prayer, asking all the saints she knew to protect this young woman. The nurses had to gently pull Claire away when it was time to take Gianna. Mother and son watched as the gurney disappeared through the double doors of the surgical center. "And now?" Claire asked with a weak voice. Sebastian hugged his mother and led her back to the private waiting room. He knew the next few hours would be the longest of their lives. The surgery was extremely risky, and even with all available resources, Gianna's chances weren't good. But he had done everything within his power, mobilized fortunes and influence to give that woman a chance to live. "Now we wait, Mother, and hope that she is as strong as she was generous," he replied. The chief physician came to give a final update before entering surgery. He explained that in addition to correcting the cardiac malformation, they would have to deal with the damage caused by diabetes and malnutrition. It was like trying to fix a car in motion on a potholed road during a storm. Every system in Gianna's body was compromised, making the surgery exponentially more dangerous. "Mr. Clark, I need you to understand that even with everything we've done, the chances are minimal," the doctor warned. Sebastian nodded gravely, fully understanding the risks. He had built his fortune by calculating risks and probabilities, but this time the numbers were against them. Still, he did not regret any decision made. Gianna deserved this chance, however small it might be. Claire squeezed her son's hand, both preparing for the long wait. "She'll make it, I feel it in my heart," Claire said with conviction. The doors to the surgical center closed with a definitive sound, and silence fell over the waiting room. On the other side of those doors, a team of specialists began the most important fight of their careers, trying to save a woman who had given everything without expecting anything in return. Sebastian looked at the clock on the wall marking 4 in the morning and prepared himself for the most agonizing wait of his life. "Without this surgery, she won't survive," the doctor repeated, before disappearing behind the doors. Sebastian remained seated in the private waiting room, eyes fixed on the clock that now marked 5 in the morning. 1 hour had passed since Gianna had entered the surgical center, and each minute seemed to drag on like an eternity. Claire was by his side, rosary between her fingers while murmuring incessant prayers. The silence of the private hospital was broken only by the distant sound of medical equipment and occasional footsteps in the corridor. Sebastian took his phone and called his assistant again, needing a distraction, something to do besides simply waiting. "I want all possible information about Gianna, everything you can discover about her," he ordered in a tired voice. The assistant on the other end of the line promised to mobilize the company's entire investigation team to discover as much as possible about the woman who was fighting for her life in the surgical center. Sebastian hung up and stood, unable to stay still any longer. He began pacing back and forth in the room, his steps creating a hypnotic rhythm on the soft carpet. Claire watched him with concern, knowing well that behavior of her son when he was extremely anxious. "Son, sit down for a bit. You're making me even more nervous," she gently asked. Sebastian stopped walking and looked at his mother, seeing in her the same anguish he felt. He sat down again beside her and held her hand, noticing how cold it was despite the air-conditioned hospital environment. The two remained silent for a few moments, each lost in their own thoughts about the woman who had united their destinies in such an unexpected way. Claire broke the silence by sharing more details about her encounter with Gianna, about how she seemed sick but had still worried about taking care of her. "She had so little, Sebastian, and gave me everything," Claire repeated for the 10th time due to her memory problems. A hospital social worker knocked on the door and entered the room with a folder of documents. She was a middle-aged woman with a gentle expression and glasses hanging from her neck by a golden chain. She introduced herself and explained that she had been assigned to help with Gianna's case, since she had no known family or adequate documentation. Sebastian immediately became interested, asking for any information she had about Gianna's past. "Please, I need to understand who this extraordinary woman is," he said, leaning forward. The social worker opened the folder and began to share what she had managed to discover through contacts at other hospitals and social institutions. Gianna had been admitted to public hospitals several times in the past 2 years, always in a state of malnutrition or problems related to poorly controlled diabetes. The records were fragmented, but painted a picture of gradual decline of someone who clearly had had a different life before. "I found old records showing that she had premium health insurance until 3 years ago," the social worker revealed. Sebastian asked for more details, and the social worker continued her narrative. Through a deeper search, she had discovered that Gianna had been a university professor of literature at a respected institution. Her colleagues described her as brilliant, dedicated, and always willing to help struggling students. She had published several academic articles and was considered a promising figure in the field of contemporary literary studies. "How does someone like that end up on the streets?" Claire asked with disbelief. The social worker took a deep breath before continuing with the most difficult part of the story. Gianna had a daughter, Sophia, who developed leukemia at the age of 5. What followed were 2 years of intensive treatments, constant hospitalizations, and astronomical medical expenses. Gianna had sold everything she owned, taken out loans, used every possible resource to try to save her daughter. She had left her job to care for Sophia full-time. "The girl passed away 2 years ago, a few months before turning 8, said the social worker with a choked voice. Sebastian felt a tightness in his chest hearing about Gianna's devastating loss. He looked at his mother and saw tears streaming down her face as she processed the tragedy. The social worker continued explaining that after Sophia's death, Gianna had fallen into deep depression. Without a job, hopelessly in debt and emotionally destroyed, she had lost her apartment and ended up on the streets. Her records show she tried to get back on her feet several times, but always ended up back on the streets, the social worker concluded. Claire abruptly stood up and went to the window, watching the sun rising over the city. The first light of dawn painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, contrasting with the darkness that still dominated the streets below. She thought of Gianna, who had lost everything she loved most in the world, and yet had found within herself enough compassion to help a stranger. "My God, how much suffering can one person carry?" she murmured against the glass. Sebastian asked the social worker to continue, needing to know more about the woman who was fighting for her life just a few meters away. The social worker leafed through more documents and found accounts from other homeless people who had crossed paths with Gianna. Several of them mentioned how she always shared the little she had, how she taught others to read and write using old newspapers, how she cared for the sick even while being sick herself. She was known as the professor among the homeless population, the social worker informed. A hospital employee who had worked at the community hospital recognized Gianna and shared a particularly touching story. He recounted seeing Gianna give her only blanket to a pregnant teenager during an especially cold winter night. Gianna had spent the night shivering from cold, but had refused to take the blanket back when offered. She said the girl needed it more because of the baby, the emotional employee reported. Sebastian stood up and began pacing the room again, processing all the information about Gianna. Each detail revealed a woman of extraordinary kindness, someone who even at rock bottom had chosen to help others instead of surrendering to bitterness. He thought about his own privileged life, how he had never really faced true adversity, and felt a mixture of admiration and shame. "I have so much and do so little. She had nothing and gave everything," he reflected aloud. The social worker mentioned that she had managed to locate one of Gianna's former university colleagues who was willing to speak on the phone. Sebastian immediately asked to make the call, putting it on speakerphone so everyone could hear. The woman on the other end of the line, with an emotional voice, began to talk about Gianna before the tragedy. She described a brilliant professional, a devoted mother, someone who lit up any room with her presence. "Gianna was the kind of person who made you want to be better," said the former colleague. The conversation revealed more details about the period of Sophia's illness. Gianna had become an informal expert in childhood leukemia, spending nights studying alternative treatments, researching clinical trials, doing anything to try to save her daughter. She had created a blog sharing information with other parents in similar situations, offering support even while fighting her own impossible battle. She never lost hope until the very last day. the former colleague recounted with a choked voice. Claire sat down again, once more holding the rosary between her fingers. She thought about how she had initially judged Gianna by her appearance, how she had almost felt afraid when she approached her at the hospital. Now, knowing the full story, she felt ashamed of her prejudices and even more gratitude for Gianna's sacrifice. "She is an angel in disguise, Sebastian. A true angel," she said, looking at her son. Sebastian's assistant called with more information he had managed to discover. He had located the blog that Gianna maintained during Sophia's treatment. The posts, still available online, were a moving testimony of maternal love and resilience. In one of the last entries, Gianna had written about accepting the inevitable, about finding peace in knowing she had done absolutely everything possible. "Sophia taught me that love is the only thing that truly matters," Sebastian read aloud from his cell phone screen. The social worker added that she had found records of Gianna trying to rebuild her life after losing Sophia. She had enrolled in social reintegration programs, had tried to get temporary jobs, but depression and the weight of debt always pulled her back. Each failed attempt left her more hopeless, until eventually she had stopped trying. "The system failed her at every possible level," the assistant commented with evident frustration. Sebastian felt anger growing inside him, not directed at anyone specific, but at the system, society, himself, for never having paid attention to the Giannas of the world. How many people like her passed invisibly through his life every day, while he worried about mergers and acquisitions? He picked up the phone again and called his lawyer, ordering him to immediately begin the process to settle all of Gianna's debts. "I don't care how much it is, pay everything," he instructed. 2 hours had passed since the surgery began, and the tension in the room was palpable. A nurse came in to inform that the surgery was progressing, but it was even more complex than initially anticipated. Gianna's debilitated state made each procedure exponentially riskier. Sebastian and Claire exchanged concerned looks, both understanding that the next few hours would be critical. "She is strong. She will make it," said Claire more to herself than to Sebastian. The social worker continued sharing stories about Gianna that she had collected. A bakery owner downtown told that Gianna always took the previous day's bread that he set aside for those in need, but never took more than her fair share, even when she was clearly starving. She always insisted that others needed it too. "She had more dignity living on the street than many have in mansions," the baker commented. Sebastian decided he needed to do something more concrete while waiting. He called his company's human resources director and ordered the immediate creation of an employment program for homeless people, with Gianna as the first beneficiary as soon as she recovered. He also instructed the creation of a foundation in Sophia's name to help families dealing with childhood leukemia. "If Gianna survives, she will never be in need again," he promised. Claire watched her son transform his anxiety into action, creating in a few hours what politicians took years to promise and never fulfill. She knew Sebastian was trying to somehow compensate for Gianna's sacrifice, trying to balance the cosmic scale in some way, but she also knew that nothing they could do would truly repay what Gianna had done. Some debts can only be paid with eternal gratitude, she thought. The morning slowly advanced, and the hospital began to come alive with the movement of the day. Doctors arrived for their shifts, nurses changed shifts, and the hospital routine continued oblivious to the drama unfolding in the operating room. Sebastian had lost count of how many times he had looked at the clock, each minute seeming like an hour. "Why is it taking so long?" he asked the social worker, who had no answer. One of the assistant surgeons came out of the operating room to give an update. His coat was sweaty, and his expression was serious. He explained that they had encountered additional complications during the procedure. Gianna's heart was even more damaged than the exams had shown, and they were having to make much more extensive repairs. Each suture was a challenge due to the fragility of the tissues. "We are doing everything possible, but I need you to understand that the situation is extremely serious," he warned before returning. Claire began to cry silently, and Sebastian hugged her, feeling his own emotional control unravel. They had begun that journey as mother and son, seeking to reunite, and now they were united in the anguishing wait for the life of a woman who had inexplicably become important to both of them. The social worker discreetly left the room to give them privacy. "She has to survive, Sebastian. She has to survive," Claire sobbed. Sebastian thought about all the business meetings he had presided over, all the difficult decisions he had made, all the calculated risks he had taken in his career. Nothing compared to the helplessness he felt now, waiting while others fought to save Gianna. All his money, all his influence, could do nothing more than create the conditions for the attempt. "Money can't buy everything," he muttered bitterly. Another hour passed, and the sun was already high in the sky when another member of the surgical team came out to speak with them. The surgery was in its most critical phase. They were trying to get Gianna's heart to function properly after the repairs. The next step would be crucial, as they would determine if the damaged organ could sustain Gianna's life. Sebastian and Claire rose simultaneously, the tension evident in their postures. "How much longer?" Sebastian asked hoarsely. The doctor estimated another hour or two, depending on how Gianna responded to the final procedures. He mentioned that the team was impressed with Gianna's resilience, that despite everything, her body was still fighting to survive. It was as if she had an inner strength that defied all medical logic. Claire smiled weakly through her tears. "She's a fighter. She always has been, even without knowing us," she said. Sebastian began calling his contacts again, now organizing what would be necessary for Gianna's recovery. He reserved a private suite for her, hired private nurses, physical therapists, psychologists, nutritionists. If Gianna survived the surgery, she would have the best possible recovery treatment. He also instructed his team to prepare a furnished apartment for when she was discharged. "Nothing second-rate, I want the best of everything," he ordered. The social worker returned with more information she had discovered. One of Gianna's students had created a social media page years ago, trying to help her, but had lost contact after Gianna disappeared into the streets. The student had written a moving text about how Gianna had changed her life, how she had inspired her to continue studying when she wanted to quit. "Gianna taught me that literature is not about books, it's about humanity," was written in the post. Claire asked to see photos of Gianna before everything happened, and the social worker showed some she had found on the university website. The images showed a vibrant, smiling woman, full of life, surrounded by students at academic events. The contrast with the fragile and destroyed woman who was fighting for her life in the surgical center was painful. "How can life be so cruel?" Claire questioned, looking at the photos. Sebastian studied the photos too, trying to reconcile the successful university professor with the homeless woman who had saved his mother. It was the same person, but also not. Life had taken everything from her, except her essence, her fundamental goodness that had survived all tragedy. He wondered if he would have that strength, that ability to continue being good in a world that had been so cruel. "I wouldn't have survived what she went through," he admitted. 4 hours had passed since the beginning of the surgery, when the movement in the surgical center corridor increased. Nurses were running, carrying blood bags and additional equipment. Sebastian and Claire approached the door, trying to understand what was happening. One of the nurses, seeing them, muttered something about complications before disappearing behind the doors. "What's happening?" Sebastian shouted, but no one answered. The tension in the waiting room became almost unbearable. Claire grabbed Sebastian's arm tightly, her nails digging through the expensive fabric of his shirt. They could hear urgent voices coming from the surgical center, orders being shouted. The unmistakable sound of a medical emergency in progress. Sebastian felt his heart race, fear taking over him. "No, not now, not after all this," he silently pleaded. A different doctor came running out of the surgical center, his face pale and tense. He stopped briefly before Sebastian and Claire, his expression saying everything even before he spoke. Gianna had gone into cardiac arrest during the final phase of surgery. Her heart, already so damaged and stressed, had simply stopped beating. The team was doing everything possible to revive her. "So I need to know that the situation is critical," he said before running back. Claire fell to her knees on the floor, the rosary escaping from her hands and scattering across the carpet. Sebastian tried to lift her, but his own legs were too weak. He knelt beside his mother, both embracing as the world seemed to crumble around them. After everything Gianna had been through, after all the effort to save her, her heart had decided it was too much. "Please God, don't take her now," Claire wept. Sebastian rose with difficulty and went to the surgical center door, pressing his face against the small glass that allowed limited vision of the interior. He could see frantic movement, doctors and nurses working over Gianna's motionless body. Someone was performing cardiac compressions, while others adjusted equipment and administered medications. The cardiac monitor was visible from where he stood. "Come on, Gianna, fight. You're a fighter," he whispered against the glass. The seconds dragged on like hours, while the medical team fought to bring Gianna back. Claire had joined Sebastian at the door, both watching helplessly as highly trained professionals did everything in their power to reverse the irreversible. The cardiac monitor continued showing the terrible straight line, each passing second diminishing the chances of recovery. "How long can a person stay like this?" Claire asked in an almost inaudible voice. More doctors were called to help, and the surgical center became a controlled chaos of desperate activity. Sebastian could see the sweat on the professionals' faces, determination mixed with growing desperation as minutes passed without response. Someone brought a defibrillator, and they prepared for another attempt. Sebastian squeezed his mother's hand when he saw the doctors momentarily step back. "It's now," he murmured. The electric shock made Gianna's body arch on the table, but the monitor continued showing the straight line. Another shock, then another, each representing a desperate attempt to restart a heart that had simply given up. The doctors continued the compressions, taking turns when they tired, no one wanting to be the first to give up. Claire prayed aloud, promising everything she could think of in exchange for Gianna's life. "She deserves to live. She deserves to be happy," she pleaded. The cardiac monitor remained relentlessly flat, the fluorescent green straight line burning the image onto Sebastian's retinas. He had seen many charts in his life, lines going up and down representing profits and losses, but never had a line meant so much. That straight line represented the end of a story that shouldn't end like this, not after so much suffering and goodness. "This isn't fair, this isn't right," he shouted, hitting the glass with his fist. The silence in the surgical center was deafening as another shock was applied to Gianna's stopped heart. Sebastian and Claire remained glued to the door's glass, watching the doctors work with growing desperation. Suddenly a small spike appeared on the monitor, then another, and then the irregular but present heart rhythm began tracing its waves on the screen. One of the doctors shouted something they couldn't hear, but the relief on his face was evident. Claire fell into Sebastian's arms, sobbing with relief as they watched the medical team mobilize with renewed energy. "She's back, my God, she's back!" Claire cried, clinging to her son. The surgery continued for 2 more intense hours, with doctors meticulously working to complete the repairs on Gianna's fragile heart. Sebastian and Claire had returned to the waiting room, but couldn't sit still, alternating between pacing back and forth and embracing when the anxiety became unbearable. Nurses entered and left the surgical center, but none stopped to give information, all too focused on the battle being waged inside. Sebastian constantly looked at the clock, counting each minute that Gianna remained alive as a small victory. "Each minute that passes is one more minute of hope," he said to comfort his mother. Finally, after 6 hours since the surgery began, the lead surgeon came out of the surgical center. His coat was completely soaked with sweat, his eyes red from extreme concentration, but there was a small smile on his tired face. He sat heavily in a chair before Sebastian and Claire, taking a deep breath before speaking. The surgery had been a success, as much as possible for such a complex case. Gianna was alive, her repaired heart was beating on its own, and she would be transferred to the intensive care unit for recovery. "It was the most difficult surgery of my career, but she made it," the doctor said with evident exhaustion. Sebastian hugged the doctor, an impulsive gesture completely out of his usual behavior, but one that expressed his infinite gratitude. Claire kissed the surgeon's hands, tears of relief streaming down her face as she repeatedly thanked him. The doctor explained that the next 72 hours would be critical, that Gianna would remain sedated to allow her body to begin recovering from the massive trauma of surgery. There would be risks of complications, infections, rejection, but for now she had overcome the impossible. "She has an extraordinary will to live," commented the doctor before leaving. 3 days passed in a haze of constant vigilance, with Sebastian and Claire taking turns at Gianna's bedside in the intensive care unit. They observed every movement on the monitors, every change in her breathing, every small sign that she was improving. Specialized nurses cared for her 24 hours a day, adjusting medications, checking vital signs, ensuring nothing was neglected. Claire had practically moved into the hospital, refusing to leave Gianna alone for more than a few minutes. "She took care of me when I was lost. Now it's my turn," Claire insisted. On the morning of the third day, as sunlight gently entered through the curtains of the luxurious hospital room where Gianna had been transferred after stabilizing, her eyes began to move beneath her closed eyelids. Sebastian, who was reading work reports on his tablet, immediately noticed the movement and called Claire, who was napping on the sofa. The two approached the bed, anxiously watching as Gianna struggled to emerge from deep sedation. Her fingers moved slightly, then her head turned gently to the side. "Gianna, can you hear me? We're here with you," Claire said softly. Gianna opened her eyes slowly, blinking several times against the soft light of the room. Her vision was blurry and she couldn't understand where she was. The clean white ceiling, the smell of fresh sheets, the soft sound of modern medical equipment, none of it made sense to someone who had spent the last 2 years sleeping on sidewalks and in underground passages. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry and painful from the tube that had been removed. Claire quickly grabbed a cup with water and a straw, helping Gianna take small sips. "Slowly, dear. Take your time," Claire guided with maternal affection. Gianna's confusion was evident in her eyes as she looked around the room, trying to process the luxurious environment. The hospital bed was of the most modern kind, with electronic controls and a special mattress. The room looked more like a 5-star hotel suite than a hospital, with fine wood furniture, a large screen television on the wall, and even a small garden visible through the wide windows. She looked at Claire and Sebastian, vaguely recognizing the elderly lady she had helped, but not understanding why they were there. Where am I?" she managed to whisper hoarsely. Sebastian approached the other side of the bed, his face showing a mixture of relief and contained emotion. He gently explained that Gianna was in the hospital, that she had undergone surgery and was recovering. Gianna frowned, trying to remember what had happened, but her memory was foggy. Fragments came back gradually: the community hospital, the terrible hunger, Claire asking for food, the sandwich. She looked at Claire with sudden concern. "Are you all right? Did you manage to eat?" she asked with difficulty. Claire began to cry upon hearing Gianna's first concern being about her well-being, even after everything she had been through. She took Gianna's hand between hers, feeling the warmth that had been missing for days while she fought between life and death. Claire nodded vigorously, unable to speak for a few moments due to emotion. When she finally managed to control her voice, she looked into Gianna's eyes with infinite gratitude. "You saved my life, my dear. You gave me your last food when you had nothing else," Claire said with a choked voice. Gianna tried to minimize the gesture, but even speaking was difficult. She didn't understand all this apparatus, the luxurious room, the well-dressed people by her side. In her confused mind, she was still just a beggar whom nobody saw, who didn't deserve all this attention. Sebastian noticed Gianna's confusion and discomfort and decided to explain everything from the beginning. He told her how he had desperately searched for his missing mother, how he had found her in the hospital being cared for by Gianna. "You gave everything you had to a stranger. That's something I've never seen in my entire life," he said with evident admiration. Sebastian continued explaining how Gianna had fainted after helping Claire, how he had arrived and discovered her sacrifice. He detailed the transfer to the private hospital, the discovery of the heart condition, the emergency surgery that saved her life. Gianna listened to everything with growing disbelief, unable to process that someone had made so much effort to save her. Tears began to stream down her face as the reality of the situation began to sink in. "Why? Why did you do all this for me?" she asked between sobs. Claire squeezed Gianna's hand more tightly, her face showing determination mixed with affection. She explained that there were moments of clarity and moments of confusion in her mind, that the onset of Alzheimer's sometimes left her lost and disoriented. That day at the hospital, she had left home without telling anyone, wandered for hours without knowing where she was, and ended up at the community hospital, unable to explain who she was or ask for help. Gianna had been her guardian angel, caring for her when she was most vulnerable. "You treated me with dignity when I was lost and confused," Claire said emotionally. Sebastian sat in the chair next to the bed, his usual corporate posture replaced by something more human and vulnerable. He began to talk about his mother, about how her recent Alzheimer's diagnosis had turned his life upside down. He was a man accustomed to solving problems with money and influence, but his mother's disease was something all his power couldn't cure. Seeing Gianna, who had nothing, care for Claire with such compassion had changed something fundamental in him. "So you taught me a lesson that no business book could teach," he admitted. Gianna tried to sit up, but her body was still too weak. Claire quickly adjusted the bed electrically so she could be in a more comfortable position. The movement revealed the bandages on Gianna's chest, physical reminders of the surgery that had saved her life. She lightly touched the bandages, still processing that she had been so close to death. The last thing she clearly remembered was sitting with Claire at the community hospital. "How long have I been asleep?" she asked. Sebastian explained that it had been 3 days since the surgery, that her body had needed that time to begin to recover. He mentioned that the best doctors in the country had taken care of her, that no resource had been spared to ensure her recovery. Gianna shook her head, overwhelmed by the generosity she couldn't comprehend. She had lived so long being invisible, being treated as less than human, that being treated with such care was almost painful. "I don't deserve all this," she murmured, looking at her hands. Claire stood up with some difficulty and sat on the edge of the bed, stroking Gianna's hair that had been washed and combed while she was unconscious. It was a maternal gesture that Gianna hadn't felt in years, since before losing everything. Claire looked deeply into Gianna's eyes, her own determination clear despite the occasional moments of confusion. "My dear, you deserve this and much more. You have a pure heart, something rare in this world," Claire said with conviction. Sebastian got up and went to the window, looking at the city below while organizing his thoughts. When he turned back to Gianna, there was a determination in his eyes that she recognized as the same she had seen in powerful executives in her previous life. He began to talk about his plans, about how he had used the days while she was unconscious to organize her new life. All her debts had been paid off, an apartment was being prepared for her, a bank account had been opened in her name. "You will never want for anything again, Gianna," he declared firmly. Gianna began to protest, saying she couldn't accept so much charity, that she didn't want to be a burden to anyone. But Sebastian gently interrupted her, explaining that it wasn't charity, it was justice. He had researched her story, knew about Sophia, about her lost career, about the injustices she had suffered. He showed her a folder with documents, including news about her daughter, her published academic articles, testimonials from former students about her impact on their lives. "You have already contributed much to the world, Gianna. Let the world give back a little," he said. Gianna's tears intensified when she saw the photos of Sophia in the folder. Sebastian had recovered images from the blog she maintained, including photos of happy moments before the illness. Seeing her daughter's smiling face after so long was like a knife to the heart, but also a balm for her wounded soul. She traced Sophia's face in the photo with a trembling finger, remembering the sound of her laughter, the smell of her hair, the weight of her in her arms. "My little Sophia," she whispered with infinite longing. Claire picked up one of the photos and studied it with affection. She could see the resemblance between mother and daughter, the same gentle eyes, the same smile that lit up the room. Claire shared that she had grandchildren whom she rarely saw, who lived in another country, and that she understood the pain of being separated from beloved children. She put the photo back in the folder carefully and held Gianna's face between her hands. "Sophia would be very proud of the woman you are," Claire said with certainty. Sebastian sat back down, now holding a document he had prepared with his lawyers. It was the formal proposal for the creation of the Sophia Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping homeless people with health problems. He explained his vision, a place where people like Gianna could receive not only medical treatment, but help to rebuild their lives, education, professional training, psychological support, assistance in finding housing. "And I want you to coordinate all of this," he announced. Gianna looked at Sebastian as if he had lost his mind. How could she coordinate anything? She was a former beggar, a broken woman who had lost everything. But Sebastian continued, explaining that this was exactly why she was perfect for the position. She knew the real needs of homeless people, understood the challenges in a way that no trained social worker could understand. Her experience as a teacher would be invaluable for creating educational programs. "You've lived on both sides, Gianna. Who better to build a bridge?" he argued. Claire added her support to the idea, telling how she had seen Gianna help others even when she had nothing. The stories she had heard from other homeless people about the teacher who taught and cared for them. Gianna had a natural gift for helping others, and now she would have the resources to do it on a larger scale. Claire took Gianna's hand again and squeezed it affectionately. "You can transform your suffering into hope for others," she said wisely. Gianna closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. It wasn't just a second chance at life, it was an opportunity to give meaning to all her suffering. She thought of all the people she had met on the streets, all who were still out there struggling to survive. She thought of Sophia and what she would want her mother to do. When she opened her eyes again, there was a small flame of determination that Sebastian and Claire hadn't seen before. I don't know if I'm capable," she said hesitantly. Sebastian leaned forward, his tone changing to something more personal and less businesslike. He confessed that he also had doubts about his abilities every day, that running a business empire was terrifying, that responsibility for hundreds of jobs kept him awake at night. But he had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting despite it. Gianna had shown more courage giving away her last sandwich than he had shown in his entire life. "If you had the courage for that, you have the courage for anything," he affirmed. Claire began to talk about her own fears, about how the Alzheimer's diagnosis had terrified her. Knowing that she would lose her memories, her identity, piece by piece, was the scariest thing she could imagine. But Gianna had treated her with dignity and respect, even in her most confused moment, had seen the person behind the disease. That had given Claire hope that even when her mind failed, there would still be kindness in the world for her. "You gave me courage to face what lies ahead," Claire confessed. Gianna looked between mother and son, seeing in them not rich people offering charity, but human beings offering genuine connection. She had spent so much time alone, building walls to protect herself from pain, that she had forgotten what it was like to have people who cared. Their offer wasn't just about money or work. It was about belonging, about family. Fresh tears appeared in her eyes, but this time they weren't from sadness. "You barely know me," she said with a trembling voice. Claire laughed softly, a musical sound that filled the room. She explained that sometimes you don't need to know someone for long to know who they really are. Gianna's actions that day at the hospital had revealed more about her character than years of acquaintance could show. Sebastian agreed, adding that he had extensively investigated Gianna's past, and everything he discovered only confirmed his initial impression. "We know what matters. Your heart," Claire said simply. Gianna tried to protest again, saying that she didn't deserve such kindness, that she had failed as a mother by not being able to save Sophia, that she had failed as a person by ending up on the streets. But Sebastian interrupted her firmly, taking one of Sophia's photos from the folder. He pointed to the girl's radiant smile, to the evident love in her eyes when she looked at the camera, clearly at her mother behind it. "You didn't fail her, Gianna. You fought until the end. Sophia had 7 years of unconditional love," he said with conviction. Claire added that losing a child was the most unimaginable pain that existed, something no parent should go through. The fact that Gianna had survived it, even if she had fallen, was testament to her strength. And more importantly, even after all that pain, she had still chosen to help others. That wasn't failure, it was heroism of the purest kind. Claire stood up and went to a bag in the corner of the room, taking out something wrapped in tissue paper. "I have something for you," she said, returning to the bed. Gianna carefully unwrapped the gift, revealing a delicate silver chain with a heart pendant. Claire explained that she had bought it while Gianna was unconscious, that she wanted her to have something to remember, that she now had people who loved her. But Gianna noticed that the pendant could be opened, and inside were 2 small photos, one of Sophia and another of Claire and Sebastian together. "Family," Claire said simply, closing the pendant. Sebastian cleared his throat, visibly moved, and returned to the subject of the foundation. He explained that he had rented a building downtown, easily accessible for the homeless population. Renovations would begin as soon as Gianna was recovered enough to give her opinion on the design and services offered. He had hired architects, but wanted Gianna to have the final word on everything. "You know what these people really need," he said, showing the blueprints. Claire leaned in and gently kissed Gianna's forehead, a maternal gesture that broke Gianna's last defenses. Years of pain, loneliness, and despair began to flow in deep sobs. Claire embraced her, letting Gianna cry on her shoulder while Sebastian held her hand. They stayed like this for long minutes, 3 wounded souls finding healing in each other. "Say yes," Claire whispered. "Let's change the world. Let's spread your kindness even further." Gianna raised her head and looked at the 2 hopeful faces in front of her. She thought about her journey, from university professor to the streets. And now this. Perhaps all the suffering had a purpose. Perhaps it had been to lead her to this moment, these people, this opportunity to make a difference. With a trembling but clear voice, she finally answered. "Yes, yes, I accept," she said. Sebastian let out a sigh of relief that he didn't know he was holding, and Claire applauded softly, her face radiant with joy. Sebastian took out a pen and offered it to Gianna, who signed the documents with a shaky hand. It was surreal to be signing documents again, having a legal identity, a future. Claire signed as a witness, her signature a little shaky due to emotion and the early effects of Alzheimer's. "Welcome to the family, sister," Sebastian said with a genuine smile. The next few minutes were spent discussing practical plans. Gianna would stay in the hospital for a few more days, then be transferred to the apartment Sebastian had prepared. She would have continuous medical monitoring, physiotherapy, psychological therapy to process her trauma. Claire insisted they would have lunch together every Sunday, a new family tradition. Sebastian mentioned that he had recovered some of Gianna's academic writings and suggested that she consider writing again. "One day at a time," said Gianna, still processing everything. A nurse came in to check Gianna's vital signs and administer medication. She commented on how rare it was to see such family dedication, how Sebastian and Claire had practically lived in the hospital during Gianna's recovery. Gianna looked at her new family with infinite gratitude. They had given her more than a second chance. They had given her a renewed purpose. "How can I thank you both?" she asked. Claire took Gianna's face in her hands, her clear blue eyes lucid in that moment. She explained that the best way to thank them would be to live fully, help others as she had helped her, and never forget that she deserved to be loved. Sebastian added that seeing Gianna coordinating the foundation, saving other lives, would be thanks enough. "Transform your pain into purpose," he said. In the months that followed, Gianna recovered completely, her body and spirit renewed by the love and care she received daily. The Sophia Foundation was inaugurated 6 months later in an emotional ceremony that brought together authorities, business people, and most importantly, dozens of homeless people who would be the first beneficiaries. Gianna, elegantly dressed but with the same humility as always, cut the inauguration ribbon with tears in her eyes, knowing that her daughter would be proud. The foundation quickly became a reference in humanized care for people in vulnerable situations. Gianna personally coordinated each program, using her unique experience to create real solutions for real problems. Under her leadership, hundreds of people received not only shelter and food, but education, medical treatment, psychological support, and most importantly, dignity. Many got jobs, rebuilt their lives, and some even became volunteers at the foundation, creating a virtuous cycle of help and hope. Claire, despite the gradual advancement of Alzheimer's, received the best possible medical care. Sebastian had transformed the family mansion into a safe and welcoming environment for his mother, with specialized nurses and Gianna always nearby. On lucid days, Claire helped at the foundation, receiving visitors and sharing her story. On confused days, Gianna was always there to calm her, returning with infinite patience the care she had received. The elderly woman found peace knowing she was surrounded by love, even when her memory failed. Sebastian discovered a purpose beyond business. He reorganized his priorities, delegating more responsibilities in the company to spend time with his new family. Sunday lunches became sacred, Moments where the three shared stories, laughter and sometimes tears. He and Gianna developed a relationship of true siblings, he protective and she wise, both caring for Claire with devotion. The cold businessman had transformed into a complete man, who understood that true success was measured in transformed lives, not profits. Gianna found in the Foundation's work a way to honor Sophia's memory. Each person helped, each life saved, was a tribute to her daughter. She started writing again, publishing a book about her experience that became a bestseller, with all proceeds going to the Foundation. University professors invited her to lectures, where she moved audiences by telling how a single act of kindness had changed not only her life, but that of hundreds of people. The sandwich given with love had multiplied into hope for many. The family that fate had formed in that hospital prospered beyond all expectations. Gianna cared for Claire like a true daughter. Sebastian protected Gianna like the brother he always wanted to be, and Claire, even in her mental confusion, radiated maternal love for both. They had discovered that family wasn't just about blood, but about choosing to love each other every day, especially in difficult times. The homeless woman who had given her last sandwich had gained infinitely more in return: a home, a purpose, and most importantly, people who loved her unconditionally. Now tell me in the comments where you're from and tell me, did you like this story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and check out the next one that's waiting for you here on the screen. I'll see you there.